In this lecture, we will talk a little bit about the community and politics and regulations that affect the Bitcoin environment. Our first topic will be about consensus and how the Bitcoin community agree on certain things. The first thing is consensus about rules. And everyone must agree on what makes a transaction valid, and in turn, what makes a block valid, as well as how peer to peer nodes should behave and interact with each other, as well as protocols and formats. Another thing that we must have consensus about is history. Uh, and this is history of the blockchain. They must agree on what the contents of a blockchain are. Therefore, which transactions have occurred, which coins exist, and who owns them, things of that nature. The third type of consensus that must be present is that the coins are valuable. We all must have a general agreement that the coin that I have today is going to be able to be exchanged for something of value at a future time. Um, every currency needs to have this consensus. This is not, just special to Bitcoin, and this is one that the consensus is actually there because we believe that in the future everyone will think that it has value. This is sometimes called the Tinkerbell effect, just because it is circular, because it's there, because you believe it's there. That's sort of like Tinkerbell said that she existed because you believe that she existed. But anyway, that's a side note. And all of these consensuses are sort of depend on each other and are a little bit circular in that. And all of these types of consensuses will interact with each other. As you can see here, the consensus about rules and consensus about history are very related to each other and will kind of affect each other. Obviously, we have to agree with what is in the rules and what is in the history before we will actually believe that the coins have any value. Uh, so you can kind of see here how they all interact with each other and just kind of form in a cycle. Now, another part of the community factor that really obviously affects Bitcoin is going to be the Bitcoin core software. Now, this is the original software that was released when Bitcoin was first launched, and is an open source software, which means anyone is able to use it, alter it to some point as long as the license is not stripped out of it. And this is the most widely used Bitcoin software. It is kind of the spearhead of all of them. Even those who don't use this software kind of follow its lead on rules and how things are processed and so on. A very important aspect of the Bitcoin community is something called the Bitcoin Improvement Protocols, or BIP for short. And what these are just formal proposals to change something in Bitcoin. This could be technical specifications and rationale, and these are all published in a numbered series. And each BIP has a champion to evangelize or coordinate, or basically someone that is pushing it and trying to push it through and notifying everyone else about it to get this protocol changed. And there can be informational BIPs or process oriented BIPs. And so if you wanted to make a change to how Bitcoin does a particular function, then you would propose one of these BIPs and it would get broadcast out to the network, and then it would start generally talking about it and discussing how it should be implemented, or even if it should be implemented. Now, you can't really talk about the core Bitcoin software without talking about the core developers and who are actively in charge of kind of seeing where the software goes and implementing some of the changes. And these six original developers. There, however, are only five of them that are currently active. The head developer, Satoshi Nakamoto, is not currently active. He's actually has not been heard of very rarely since the launch of Bitcoin. But these are the core developers, and we'll talk a little bit about how much power they have and influence that they have over Bitcoin going forward. And so, obviously, these core developers do hold some power over the software and Bitcoin itself. Any of their rule changes will be followed by default because they are the ones that are writing the software that controls it all. However, anyone is able to fork the software at any time. Uh, as we talked about the different types of forks in blockchains earlier, a fork like a software fork on this could be followed by someone else that wanted to make the changes and not follow these rules. So therefore, it's sort of like the core developers have more influence, but not the final say. They're kind of what's considered to be leading the parade. So if users don't like a rule change, they're able to kind of change it on their own and develop that fork. Um, Many people say that the right to develop that fork is more empowering than the right to just exit and leave a market, such as what you would do on a centralized currency. You have if you don't like a rule change, you just say, hey, I'm not using this anymore. But with Bitcoin, you have that right, and it is often looked at as being more powerful than the right to leave. And so, what might happen when one of these forks in the rules occurs? You can see here that on the left we have Bitcoin, and so one of these rule forks has occurred, and you have two different branches of this fork that goes out, and they will all have both have their separate rules, and those two branches can never merge back together. So in essence, you have now created two new coins out of this. So you anyone that had the Bitcoin previously will now have one A coin and one B coin. Um, and this is basically the currency has also forked and not just the rules. But like I said before, it is important to mention that they cannot merge back together. They are permanently separated from here on out. So, what happens when one of these hard forks do occur? The answer is it kind of depends. Why was that that fork actually started. Was it meant to start an altcoin, an alternative coin? If the answer is yes, then the alternative coin goes its own separate way, and the altcoin and the Bitcoin coexist all nicely, peacefully. Nothing ever happens again. Um, they go on about their business. Now, if the fork was over a fight over the future of Bitcoin, then the what will more than likely happen is the branches will fight for market share. There will be fights over which one is seen as the real Bitcoin and which one is correct. And more than likely, one of those will win out and continue on successfully, and the other one will just sort of fade away, fizzle out, and no longer exist. So we have talked about the consensus and the core developers and the core software and forking, and but who exactly is in charge? Who has the power in the Bitcoin ecosystem? Suppose there is a negotiation or about rule setting and who's deciding what, who controls that outcome? Well, the answer is it kind of depends on who would win the fight if they fail to agree. And many people feel that the Bitcoin core developers are the ones that have all the power and are in charge. I mean, obviously they write the rule book. They are the ones that created it. It looks like they should be in charge. Almost everyone uses their code and follows their rules, so they do have a bit of power. And while this is true, others claim that the miners have the power and are in charge. I mean, after all, they are the ones that write the history. By that, I mean they are the ones that are determining what is going into the blockchain, what transactions are valid. They are the backbone of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem. Um, their history will be consistent with the miners' consensus. So what they all determine goes on there is actually what happens. And for this reason, many people say that they are the ones that have all of the power. A third claim to the power could be made for the investors. And after all, they are the ones that determine if Bitcoin has value. Um, Obviously, if they are not putting their money out towards the Bitcoin, then no one wins. So in case of a hard fork, investors could decide, they will decide which ones they want to invest in. And this could be seen as having all of the power. Another claim to where the power goes can be made for the merchants and the customers. After all, they are the ones that generate the primary demand for Bitcoin. And by that, I mean the demand for a transaction, for it to actually be used as a currency. By doing this, they drive the long term price of Bitcoin. Um, they make the argument that investors are just guessing where the merchants and customers will go. And finally, maybe it's the payment services that have the power. Um, they're the ones that really handle all of the transactions. And it's said that they drive the primary demand. This is because the merchant doesn't really care what form of payment the customer is using. He just wants to use a payment service that will pay him in, let's say, dollars. the merchants and customers, investors will all follow whatever these payment services are using. So therefore, many people think that they have all of the power. So the answer to who of these people has the power, well, actually all of them do. They all have some sort of power, and that's what actually Bitcoin helps rely on, this issue that there's not one certain group of people that are in charge of everything. They each have a little bit of power, they each have some influence, they each will concede to the other person at some time. Um, and there's also one other player in this power game, and that is called the Bitcoin Foundation. And this was founded in 2012 for a couple of different reasons. It's a group that actually pays the core developers a salary, or some of them pays them a salary. They also talk to governments as the voice of Bitcoin. Um, Now, this kind of leads to a little bit of controversy because many people feel that Bitcoin should be completely independent from government. It also raises the question of, hey, who who put this Bitcoin Foundation in charge of doing anything? Who said we could do that? And of course, the answer to that again is all of them and no one. They all, as I said, they all have some form of power, and it must be this way in order to achieve consensus, and to keep Bitcoin running smoothly. Now let's take a look at some of the precursors to Bitcoin. There are a couple that are worth mentioning. One is the cypherpunk movement, which was based on it came out of a lot of libertarianism, which basically said that, hey, the world would be better off without little or no government involvement in anything, as well as strong cryptography. When this came about, it was looked at. We've got a good way of crypting different things and try to get the government out of things. And that is kind of the cypherpunk movement. However, one of the issues with cypherpunk was, how do you deal with cash without the government's involvement, or how do you have a currency to make your everyday purchases and things like that. At the same time, there was a lot of early research in digital cash, a way of using online payments that would act like cash, but would not be government backed, but would still have the same ease of use and anonymity as cash. So these are the movements that sort of got the Bitcoin ball rolling, per se, and that those are the studies that kind of led to the launch of Bitcoin. So then Bitcoin was launched in 2008, and it was released as an open source software along with a white paper titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And all of this was released by someone by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. And this is the part that I find really interesting. There's not a lot of information known about Satoshi Nakamoto. It's almost certainly a pseudonym. This is probably not the real name of this person. Uh, we do know that there are certain public keys that are associated with Satoshi, um, which means he's the owner of some bitcoins, owns a lot of Bitcoin from the early days. He's very rarely been heard from since 2010. Um, we do know that he writes fairly well in English. Don't know if it is a first language. Don't know if it's a second language. There's just not a lot of information about him or her. It's I find that very interesting. And you can see from this chart that shows the transaction volume per day from 2009 to 2014, the growth in the number of transactions that occur using Bitcoins has grown tremendously each day. And along with that transaction number growth, you can see that the total value of Bitcoin has grown tremendously as well. And these are numbers that end in 2014. The total value of Bitcoin now in present day, it has grown tremendously since then as well. So, of course, with this type of growth, has also gained some interest and notice from governments. And the reason that government starts noticing this is its untraceable digital cash kind of defeats capital controls. In other words, a country can't stop Bitcoin value from flowing in or out of the government. So if I'm in the US and I buy Bitcoins, then I can then digitally transfer my Bitcoins to someone in France, and then that that can then be sold outside of the U.S. and in France, and there's no way to trace that or control the way that's coming in and out. It The government looks at trying to disconnect Bitcoin world from the fiat currency through financial institutions. And so, what exactly is the problem with untraceable digital cash? Well, not everyone is going to be using it for the better of the world. It can be used for kidnapping and extortion, uh, also as tax evasion, or the sale of illegal items, such as was the problem with a site called Silk Road. It was often referred to as the eBay of illegal items. Uh, you could basically buy or sell very illegal items online through them, and it was untraceable. You could not tell where it was going, where it was coming from, who it was linked to, or anything like that. So obviously, there are some downsides to untraceable digital cash. As I mentioned, Silk Road is the largest online market for illegal drugs, and the payments were occurred. They took place in Bitcoin, and they held Bitcoin in escrow while the items shipped, and it was run by the Dread Pirate Roberts. who is found on this next slide here. Unfortunately for him, he was arrested in 2013. And the government says that he tried to cover his tracks, but they connected the dots and found him, and has been accused of running and controlling the Silk Road site. And it's interesting to note that the government did seize 174,000 bitcoins and then auctioned them to the public. So, it is hard to keep the real world and the virtual world separate. It's hard to stay anonymous for a long time. And the government can follow the money and find out who you are. It's hard to have that kind of money and power and not use it and sort of flex it and be able to be found. And which all of this is why we have anti-money laundering laws. And the goal of the anti-money laundering laws is to stop large amounts of money from crossing over international borders or moving underground from underground things such as drug sales and drug cartels, things of that nature, into the legitimate economy without detection. And we have things then set in place to prevent this type of activity, known as the Know Your Customer laws and rules. And you have to identify and authenticate your clients. They usually have to show some kind of identity to show that they are who they are. You have to evaluate the risks of your clients. And more importantly, just keep an eye out for odd behavior, things that just don't seem right. And along with these rules, the U.S. has mandatory reporting laws, which state that everyone must report any kind of currency transactions that are over $10,000. They have to file a currency transaction report, as well as watching for clients, structuring transactions to avoid that reporting. So if every week they're doing a $2,000, a $3,000, and a $5,000 transaction right in beside each other, you have to watch for that, and goes back to the know your customer concept. Requirements like this differ by country, so obviously you'd want to talk to someone with a little bit more authority and knowledge about the local laws about that. In long story short, governments take this type of stuff very seriously. Bitcoin businesses have been shut down, and people have been arrested for doing these kind of unlawful, less than ethical activities. And for the rest of this lecture, we'll kind of talk a little bit about regulation and government's involvement in regulating currency and transactions. And of course, there are arguments for and against both sides. And most people are familiar with the arguments against regulation. Nobody wants somebody else telling them what they can and cannot do. However, the argument for regulation is not quite as understood as the opposing side. Um, so that's kind of what we'll talk a little bit more about, which, like when markets fail and produce bad outcomes, regulation can address the failure. And an example of that would be like a lemons market, and not like the fruit, but like the what is often called the you've heard of the lemon laws of a faulty vehicle or something like that. But just take a market for a product, and this product can be a low quality item or a high quality item. Now the high quality, it's obviously going to take a little bit more to cost a little bit more to produce. However, the consumer is obviously going to like this a lot better than a low quality. And normal efficient market would deliver mostly high quality items. But what if a customer was unable to tell the difference between a high quality and a low quality at first glance, or upon first purchase? Well, the consumer would not pay extra for the high quality, and the sellers won't sell the high quality. So how are we able to sell the high quality real item as opposed to the cheaper knockoff version, if you will? And there are a couple of different ways to look at this. The market based approach would be based on the seller reputation. So company XYZ has been around for a while and they sell good products. So we're probably going to be able to trust them and know that they are selling us the high quality product and not some cheaper, low cost junk version. Um, another, however, with that, what if it's a newer company? They don't have that reputation yet. So one of the things they can offer are warranties. So if there's something wrong with it, we will stand behind our product and take it back and take care of you. However, there are some other ways to do that involve regulation. Uh, you require a disclosure and with penalties for lying. And there are certain quality standards that have to be met, and you have to enforce those standards. And then you can also require the warranties, and where the warranties are mandatory, and then you have to enforce those warranties when something may arise. Another market failure example that regulation is able to fix would be the issue of price fixing. So this is when all of the sellers come together and they agree to raise the price of product X just because that's what they all decided they wanted to do and can make some more money with that. Um, However, with regulation, that's kind of frowned upon and illegal. That's usually part of an antitrust or competition law that says, hey, you cannot do that. So, what does all of this mean to Bitcoin? Well, actually, New York has implemented a license in order to that they refer to as the BitLicense, in order to do several different things with any kind of cryptocurrency or digital currency. Um, Basically, you would need to have a BitLicense If you're going to be receiving virtual currency for any kind of transmission or transmitting any kind of currency, virtual currency, for securing and storing and holding or maintaining custody of control, buying and selling virtual currency as a customer business. So there are already things set in place to kind of regulate who can and cannot deal in these type of activities. Now, I do need to mention that this is not for just an individual that would want to invest in Bitcoin. This would be for a business that wanted to exchange, to take Bitcoin as a payment, or use Bitcoin for their currency in their daily activities. So, would first have to apply for a license, and that includes just providing information on the ownership and your financial positions. Obviously, need to have insurance and provide some sort of business plan, and then you pay your application fee and await for the outcome. And once you receive that license, there are certain things that you would have to do to uphold that, to continue to use that license. Obviously, have to provide updated information periodically, maintain a certain financial reserve, and follow the rules on custody of consumer assets. Obviously, the anti-money laundering rules that are set in place. Have to have great cybersecurity and disaster recovery plans, and a complete record keeping of all of these activities. And at the time of this lecture, when it was first released in 2014, this was still ongoing, going through approval, voting, courts, all that stuff. And since then, it has actually been put into place. I do not know all of the details on exactly what all the reporting is required and things like that, but it has already been put in place, and it has kind of started the regulations and rules that are now being seen in the Bitcoin community.